Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. Fans of the Twilight series rejoice, for we have our first extremely suave and handsome playable vampire man, Hugo, now available in Zenless Zone Zero. We'll go over everything you need to know about Hugo Vlad in today's ultimate guide video. Hugo is an incredible ice attack agent that specializes on converting an enemy's stun bar into giant totalized damage nukes. As usual, we'll go over his entire kit, best drives and stats, Wengens, Mindscapes, teams, and finally, my opinion on Hugo. This video was filmed on the early access server and is not indicative of the final product. There may be some changes on release, so be sure to check the comments down below to see if there are any. Starting off with Hugo's basic attacks, they are mildly interesting. For his basic 4, you can either just tap the basic attack button or hold the button to do a bit more damage and a bit more days at the cost of a bit more time. Hugo's basic attack, Dark Abyss Concerto, which honestly should just be called basic 5, works very similarly to his basic 4, where you can either tap or hold the button to do a bit more damage and a bit more days. For Hugo's basics 4 and 5, you can actually just hold down the basic attack button the entire time starting from basic 4, and he'll perform the charge shot version for both of them. Now the real meat and potatoes in Hugo's kit though is in his EX Special and Ultimate, which both trigger Totalize versus a stunned enemy. Hugo focuses on when the enemy is stunned, that is when he does most of his damage. So let's go ahead and buff up, get the stunner's buffs up, just like this. We go for this on lighter to do a lot of days, and then we will stun the enemy with Lycon real quick. So that should be most of the buffs, and here we go. So we go into Hugo with his chain attack, which, it's not really his chain attack that matters here, but if we hit the enemy with an EX Special now, you will see this Totalize, which just casually deals, 2.17 million damage in this case. And what is going on with the Totalize mechanic here, that giant number that you see, like why is that happening and what does it do? Basically, when the enemy is stunned, so we're gonna go ahead and stun the enemy real quick. Normally, you have like somewhere between 7 and 15 seconds to smack the enemy and to wail on the enemy. But in Hugo's case, he actually basically converts the stun bar into damage, and the longer that the enemy has left to be stunned, the more damage Totalize will do. And it also removes the stun from the enemy, just like this, in order to do as much damage as possible as you can with him. And you can also follow up his Totalize with a couple of those, kind of charged scythe shots that I mentioned earlier. Those aren't really like absolutely mandatory for his kit. Most of his stuff comes from the Totalize, but that's just one more thing to do. And the thing about using Hugo, and this is actually pretty funny with this entire team. So with lighter, you can hold the left mouse button. All right. With Lycon, you hold the left mouse button a few times, okay? A few times. And we go ahead for the stun. Look at this. We go into Hugo. So we're going to go ahead and use his EX Special. There's a Totalize, and now you just hold the left mouse button. This entire team, all 3 characters, in order to perform their combos, you literally just hold the left mouse button. So mechanically speaking, this is one of the easiest teams to use, in my opinion, from like an execution perspective. And it's also very satisfying in the sense that, you get these big damage per screenshots, as well as the fact that, in my opinion, kind of the stun meta playstyle is more straightforward. You just go for the stun and then you dish your damage. Okay, so what is going on? In order to explain why Hugo's kit works like this, we actually have to take a look at his core skill. His core skill is what makes him, play in this way, is that first of all, when he does a chain attack, he gets 12% crit rate and 25% crit damage. But more importantly, what makes Hugo Hugo is that when there are 1 to 2 stunned characters in your squad, Hugo's attack increases by 300 and 900 respectively. So that's a lot of attack for just putting stun characters on your team. and when the finishing move of his EX special or his ultimate hit the enemy while they are stunned, it triggers the totalize effect. And there's a lot of yapping here, but basically what this yapping is saying is the longer the stun duration on the enemy, the bigger the multiplier for totalize will be. Essentially, Hugo is rewarded for using an EX special or ultimate against a stunned enemy sooner rather than later for a larger multiplier. With 10 to 12 seconds left on the enemy's stun bar, which is probably the most common scenario for Hugo on average, he'll have around a 3000% totalize multiplier, which is absolutely fantastic. Not only that, as we saw earlier, when the totalize is triggered, then the stun is removed from the enemy, and some of the days ends up being left on the enemy. Basically, the enemy will be left off with around 25% of their days multiplier bar, which means that you will be able to stun the enemy much more quickly, starting from 25% instead of 0. And then we have his additional ability, which pretty much just increases the amount of damage that his totalize does, if you have at least one stun agent or another ice agent on your party. Hugo's dash attack, dodge counter, and assist follow-up are largely unremarkable, although his dodge counter does lead to his basic 4. For his rotation, stun the enemy, then do a chain attack cancel, another chain attack, and either his EX special or ultimate to trigger totalize. Then you can perform the optional hold basic 4 and 5, which deals a bit of damage and daze to the unstunned enemy. For his talent priority, prioritize his core ability above all else, and then his chain attack and ultimate, followed by his basics, and after that his assists and dash. Alright, we've made it to the calculations for Hugo, and as you can see, there is always a lot of math and a ton of rows are hidden here to avoid spoilers. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to spend a lot of my weekends working on Hugo's guide because it was indeed Mother's Day, and I chose to spend that with my wife instead of with my Zenless Zone Zero waifus. So sadly for Hugo, we weren't able to give him the usual time that he deserves as our new best Zenless Zero waifu. So, starting off with the drive sets. For the 4-piece sets, there's not really much competition. For him, it's going to be the 4-piece Hormone Punk, especially with his quick swap nuke playstyle, where you mainly just want to bring him on field during the stun window in order to output massive totalizes and then swap off. The 4-piece Hormone Punk is absolutely a perfect set for that purpose. Now, do keep in mind that you want to actually avoid accidentally swapping him on for a defensive assist or something like that before the actual stun window, because that will deplete your 4-piece Hormone Punk buff before the enemy is stunned, which, he'll lose a decent amount of damage. Now, with that being said, it's the usual crit in slot 4, ice damage in slot 5, and attack percent in slot 6, and you'll see that you will lose some damage here and there, swapping out the main stats for various other main stats. And of course, things will vary depending on the teammate, but generally speaking, the top row is going to be the most universal set that most of us are going to be running. Now, what about other 2-piece set options? We have the 2-piece Woodpecker, 2-piece Polar Metal, 2-piece Astral Voice, and 2-piece Branch and Blade, all of which are great options for Hugo, and you can't really go wrong with any of them, so whichever one really just has the best substats. And 2-piece Puffer Electro, though, definitely falls behind because pen ratio isn't going to be that great on his build, especially if you have a signature Wenjin, because defense percent and pen ratio are multiplicative instead of additive, and for multipliers that are under 1, this tends to be worse instead of better. One more set worth talking about is the 4-piece Woodpecker Electro. Generally not something I highly recommend because you don't really want to waste time doing his basic attacks while the enemy is stunned. You will lose some totalized damage multiplier, not much, but still every second counts. The 4-piece Woodpecker Electro, though, is a good option if you do want to on-field Hugo. However, this guide doesn't really focus on on-field Hugo, and from my personal experience, I didn't have as much success with on-fielding him in comparison to the quick swap totalized nuke stun playstyle. Now, as for substats, we can see here that it is just the usual song and tune. It is just get as much crit as possible, followed by attack percent is pretty decent, and then we have flat pen and flat attack aren't completely useless either. So I did want to quickly talk about Hugo's crit ratio and crit stats. For Hugo, having a bit higher crit rate than usual is completely understandable because missing a crit on Totalize feels really bad. So some of you guys might even go for 100% crit rate, and I totally get that instead of the usual 1 to 2 crit ratio. Do keep in mind that when you are balancing his crit ratio, to keep in mind that you should add the 12% crit rate and 25% crit damage from his core passive, as well as, for example, if you are using his signature Wenjin or some of the other Wenjins, that this part of the crit stat right here isn't factored into this stat page, and you should actually go into combat to see his final crit stats during a chain attack / stun window for the enemy. Alright, let's quickly whinge through Hugo's Wenjins, starting with his signature Wenjin, the Myriad Eclipse, which of course is obviously his best option. No surprise there, not much else to say. His next best options are most of the 5-star stat sticks, which include the Deep Sea Visitor, standing out a bit because he can indeed weave in a basic attack during the enemy's stun window in order to gain that 10% crit rate boost. Now you do have to watch out for over crit, so definitely stack him with as much crit damage and attack percent as possible. After that, we have the usual 5-star Wenjin stat sticks, which include the Heartstring Nocturne, Severed Innocence for Sambi, the Zanshin Herb Case, and the Riot Suppressor, all of which do, a bit better than his free-to-play friendly option. Speaking of his free-to-play friendly option, then we have the Street Superstar, which at 3 stacks boosts his ultimate damage by a whopping 72%, since you get his ultimate pretty much every rotation. This means that you will be able to get some really big totalizes when his ultimate does come around. And because of that, it is actually a pretty solid option. And since it's craftable, this should be your go-to free-to-play friendly Wenjin option. After that, you have the other choices here, which I've, listed below, but I don't really recommend them over the Street Superstar because, well, over on average, they are just worse with very little to gain from them. And that brings us to his Mindscapes and investment priority. And overall, if you're using something like the Street Superstar, I recommend going for a signature Wenjin over his Mindscapes. If you do go for his Mindscapes, the biggest damage gains are from his Mindscapes 2. So you definitely want to go up to Mindscape 2 if you bother getting any of his Mindscapes at all. Because Mindscape 2 gives him an extra totalize with his ultimate or something, which sounds absolutely bonkers because it probably is. Then we have his Mindscapes 3 through 5, which are all stepping stones for his Mindscape 6. Now, I've probably lowballed his Mindscape 6, so do keep that in mind, because you are going to be able to perform some additional totalizes against unstunned enemies, which sounds kind of interesting. And finally, by Mindscape 6, upgrade 5, he'll probably be doing around 2.5 times the damage of a Mindscape 0 upgrade 1 Hugo. So let's talk about some of Hugo's teams with overall, in my opinion, his best team as of his release, with Lycon as well as Lighter, both of them providing a ton of relevant buffs for Hugo's ice damage output. And with double the stun agents, not only are you maximizing Hugo's passive to give him 900 attack, you are also able to stun the enemy very quickly with 2 stun agents on the team. Now, of course, you can indeed replace either of these stun agents with another stun agent like Kaleda or even Trigger in order to fulfill his passive as well as to stun the enemy very quickly. However, let's say you don't have those additional stun agents, or your best option is someone like Ambi or perhaps even Pulchra to a lesser extent. His next best options are likely going to be a powerful support agent like Astra Yao, or even Slow Kaku can work in this team slot as well. And needless to say, you have plenty of options like Lucy, Nicole, and Caesar as well, who can provide a ton of buffs as well as outputting a decent amount of days herself. Now, one thing I will say is that if you don't have Lycon or Lighter, Hugo's performance definitely suffers quite a bit because both of them provide a ton of buffs. So something like this might be, one of your, next best options is how I would put it. Because Kaleda can indeed stun the enemy quickly, and Lucy can, of course, provide her buffs. So yeah, in my opinion, he struggles significantly without either Lycon or Lighter, but you do have options through the other stun agents. Okay, I've got a couple very quick additional showcases for you guys tacked onto my previous Hugo showcase video, which if you guys haven't seen that, definitely go check it out down below. There's a lot more showcases than in this video. And for this one, I decided, okay, well, we have access to Mindscapes 6 Upgrade 5 for all of these characters, so let's just go ahead and YOLO this. And I chose Astro Yao instead of Lycon because I think Astro Yao definitely scales better with whale scaling than Lycon does. So I just want to see what kind of totalized damage numbers we could reach with this team. And here we go. We're going to go for it. And I believe this one did, let's see, 13 million damage, and it's actually practical damage as well. So some pretty comical numbers, which I guess I'm not too surprised to see. And there we had a double mini totalize. Interesting. I think I used an EX special with Hugo, and I'm not sure why it did 2 totalizes. I'm probably gonna actually have to go and check to see why that's the case. But regardless, you know, this applies to very, very few players where who are able to afford these types of numbers. But yeah, absolutely massive. And in this case, a double totalize because the enemy is, you know, when you use your ultimate at Mindscape 6, Mindscape 2, the enemy's stun bar does not go away, so you follow up with the EX special for a double massive totalize. And here we go. I'm sure you could easily kill this way faster than I did, but this is literally one run, and just want to give you guys a quick preview of what a whale Hugo can do. And just like that, we should be able to finish it off. And unfortunately, we actually finish it off with a chain attack, not even with a totalize. So yeah, pretty slow clear for the investment level from, you know, all things considered. However, a pretty funny showcase with massive totalize numbers. And I've one more free-to-play-ish friendly. Okay, we're using Hugo's signature Wenjin here. But let's say you don't have Lighter, let's say you don't have Trigger, let's say Astro Yao is busy with another team, and let's say Caesar, you don't have Caesar, or Caesar is on another team. You can indeed still use Slow Kaku here or another type of support agent reasonably well. And this was my first run with this team as well, so it is super, super unoptimized. I did do a few more runs in comparison with the other teams, or at least with the 52,000 score I did in the previous video that definitely had more runs. But this one here, you know, Sokaku's very slow. However, she can definitely provide some buffs which make up for the lack of having 2 stun agents on the team. However, the issue is that you will stun the enemy slower because Sokaku isn't really known for high daze values in comparison to Lighter. And in combination with the 600 attack buff that you get with having 2 stun agents plus Lighter's buffs, well, Sokaku's damage definitely pales in comparison. We're seeing 3 million totalized there, and definitely some lower totalizes earlier, I believe, if I remember correctly. And let's see how much this one does. This one is going to do, or we're doing the double chain combo first. This one is going to do 2.2 million damage, so definitely a lot less than the 4 million damage totalizes with the other team. But still, this team is still, you know, very, very capable, and in a single attempt, it was very, very easily able to 20,000 plus. So if you are looking for a decent ice attack agent, or, you know, ice DPS agent, since, you know, Miyabi's not an attack agent, but she is effectively an ice DPS agent, well, Hugo is a pretty solid character for that purpose, especially if you have Lycon or Lighter, or better yet, if you have both, then you're going to be sitting really pretty with Hugo. So yeah, I guess I don't really have much else to say about him. He's a pretty decent character, all things considered. And let me know if you like him a lot down in the comments below. If you're also a fan of the Twilight series, personally, I'm not really into Twilight that much, but I can understand, you know, a lot of people are into it, and they're going to like Hugo if that's the case. So yeah, what do you think about Hugo? Are you going to pull for him? Are you skipping him? Do you already have Miyabi? Let me know. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Want to Lose, signing out.